Hello everyone, my name is Steve Euchre and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Vulcan 10, the new Workbench interface. We're joined today by Peter Odins. Pete's the product manager for our Workbench product, and he's been involved with the development of this new interface and is going to share some of the advantages with us today. So just a couple things before we get started here. First, today's webinar will conclude with a question and answer session. So as you hear things or see things that you have questions on, feel free to write them into the panel of the GoToWebinar thing there, probably on the right-hand side of the screen. Secondly, you'll also receive a link to a recording of this webinar by email shortly afterwards, just in case you'd like to see it again or can't finish it. It will also be available on the Maptek website at a later date. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. And I think, Pete, maybe you can just tell us a little bit about why the Workbench project was launched in the first place.
Sure. Thanks, Steve, and welcome everyone to this broadcast from sunny Sydney. Basically, we've been working on this behind the scenes for a good couple of years now, and we didn't do it just to make a facelift to the product. What we're really trying to do is set up Maptek's development platform, if you like, for how we want to deliver our products and features to you users in the future. And that begins with the Vulcan 10 release, and which is integrated with Workbench version 1.0. The other thing is, if you go back as far as some of us probably do, last time we refreshed the interface was Vulcan version 4, and that was about 2000. And obviously the development sort of packages and frameworks that were available then have been vastly enhanced since. And so we wanted to take advantage and leverage off those new development frameworks to allow us to incorporate features into the interfaces and the way we do things and present the application to the users that we just couldn't do back in those days with the interfaces and things that were available back then. In fact, we had to write half of them ourselves. Thirdly, and a very important one, is we're sort of breaking up the functionality into various plugins. So rather than the Envisage package becoming bigger and bigger and being fully linked with its own interface, we've broken that apart, which allows us to then provide functionality as a separate plugin which can be tested and QA'd totally independently to the Envisage package it works with, or actually it could be any package, as we'll talk about later. So in terms of the QA time, in terms of developing software and minimizing the risk to you guys when you install it and use it, this architecture change is hugely important for us and for you. And finally, of course, we wanted to make it better for you guys to use the software packages that you're sort of familiar with using. So things like Envisage, for starters.
Excellent. I think, Pete, maybe you can just tell us a little bit about, some of the improvements that the new Workbench offers, compared to, what our users are used to now.
Sure. So there's two aspects of it. There's sort of what your users will see, and then there's the behind-the-scenes stuff. We'll see this in the software itself very soon. But basically, of course, there's a new look and feel, and the interface itself is enhanced in terms of how you use it. If you're an old dog like me who's used to using Vulcan, you get used to doing things in a certain way. But the newer users out there, you guys, expect an interface to behave in a certain way. So I think the release of version 10 with this Workbench interface will go a long way to making you, the newer users, dare I say it, the younger generation, if you like, more easily to jump straight in and use the product. The other thing is, it's going to provide the framework, the platform that with the Workbench is going to provide a single point of access to all the Maptek products. And you'll see that when I show you it fired up later. Now, initially, that's just simply corralling the various icons that start the products, and as we'll see down the track, it's going to go much further than that. It also is now a two-way connection, so we can provide you news, you can provide input to the linked interfaces on the front page. It's not just a one-way street. And ultimately, down the track, we want to do things like you can book training courses, buy things. There's really the way it's architected. It's pretty much endless as to what we can do with it. Overall, behind the scenes, the big thing you won't notice, but it's disconnected the interface that Envisage runs within from Envisage itself. And that aspect alone, apart from the fact it's a QA benefit, as I mentioned before, allows us to do things like it's a client-server architecture. So currently, both the client, which is the thing you run with and use, and the server, which does the grunt behind the scenes, are both sitting on your machine. But it is architected so that in the future, that server part things could be sitting on a very powerful server machine, and the client could be sitting on your desktop. And the other thing is, because we're disconnected from the interface, we can actually change the interface around the application, and we can intercept the messages between the interface and the application and start doing things with that information, as we'll see. And the other thing you'll see, or not see as the case may be, is that we have actually introduced a true plugin for the first time into Envisage. So before, when you saw a new menu option, that was written into Envisage and making the Envisage application, that actual executable, bigger, right? When you see the new grade control in Vulcan 10, that's actually totally separate from Envisage. It's a plugin. Now, we wrote that, we chose grade control because it's quite a difficult one, involves a lot of different data types, and we could use that as a really good way of learning all the lessons we needed to learn to make it work. But that means we can actually upgrade grade control, that plugin, and provide a new version of that plugin without at all touching the stability of the existing interface, Envisage application, if you like.
Excellent. Thanks, Pete. Maybe one more before we get to the demo portion of the webinar, and just talk a little bit about some of the direct benefits that our users are going to experience.
Sure thing. So one of the big important ones, we are a global company, you guys work for global companies, is we now truly support multi-language capability within both the Workbench interface and Vulcan itself, and I'll demonstrate that later. But that will go right down through to the actual layer naming, plot file output level of things, not just the menus themselves. The other big ticket item is the introduction of our first pass, if you like, of a workflow tool. So you can define workflows that jump to various menu options within Envisage, but also not just Envisage, but any application that Vulcan runs, like ISIS or Rapid Pit Design, can be included in a single workflow. You can also input pauses and hints and tips and prompts into that workflow, and I'll demonstrate that later. And they can then be shared around, so if you have new starters on site or you want to instigate a way of doing things, this makes it a lot easier to do that. Some nice, we had to rewrite the Explorer, so we have some nice new functionality built in there in terms of filtering, viewing files, viewing as thumbnails. If you've got 100,000 files there, how do I see just the ones I want? I'll show you some nice tools in that. The actual windowing interface, the whole way the windows work, is a real big benefit, especially if you have a multi-screen environment, because the windows can be totally detached from the actual Workbench interface and still have their own icons and things associated with them. Smaller things, like I mentioned before, for the newer users, having an auto-hide menu is nothing new. It's been around for a long time, but Vulcan 4 was a long time ago, so we've now instigated that kind of feature into the way the windows work. We've also, as you'll see, the tabbed interface allows us to plug in small little apps, if you like, that aren't necessarily Envisage but are handy to you guys. So things like there's a built-in CSV editor, there's a built-in text editor, which you can simply grab text and plonk straight into. It's very customizable from the very first screen to the way you set up your toolbars. It will allow you to bring your existing layouts in and then play with them to your heart's content, and it goes a lot further than the current customization can. And the other thing, which is not directly Workbench, but it allows you to access Eureka, and what we're going to do is provide users with the core Eureka package for a free trial for about 1.5 years, and that'll be sitting on your Workbench ready for you to have a crack at anytime you like. And Eureka, is, if you're not familiar with it, is a package we developed a little while ago based on the iSight Studio backend, if you like. So it's really designed for huge data sets. It has a lot of the really cool triangulation, filtering, point cloud viewing. It has also a lot of exploration functionality, so things like being able to access a whole range of different exploration data types very easily. It has some really, really terrific coordinate transformation capabilities within it, very powerful. And it also is great borehole viewing, drop and drag, sorry, I keep getting that back, drag and drop LAS files into the interface, and interactive editing with your drill hole database. It also has its own plug-in modules like a true radial basis function modeler, seismic survey, seismic viewing and integration analysis, geotech, and also a new tool which allows you to automatically pick lithologies from using downhole traces from geophysics or from indeed drill hole pull downs, drill hole torques, that kind of thing.
Cool. Thanks, Pete. Now, maybe we can just move into a little bit more about what it looks like live here, and maybe we can start about just what are our users going to see after they install Vulcan 10?
There'll be a huge fireworks no, okay, it won't be quite that dramatic, but basically, if you're anything like me, if you can see my desktop here, you might have various Maptek products flying around. So I've got, Maptek Evolution, I've got Eureka. They're all sitting here with their own little icons, and they all start up their own little apps and their own little interfaces. What we now have, as you'll see, is a single new icon, which basically replaces all of those, and it's called the Workbench. It's not called Vulcan. Okay. And this will allow you to get into any of the products you like just by clicking on that single icon, and all those other bits of clutter there can be removed.
I saw, Pete, on one of your first slides there, a new image of what the start page looks like. Maybe you can just spend a couple minutes and walk us through that start page. Does that look, quite a bit different than what our current users are using today?
Yeah, and I guess it goes back to the fact that the Workbench is not a Vulcan-specific thing. It's going to sit with all our products. It's a framework, a platform, if you like, that all our products will live within. So if I fire this up, if you're familiar with the current Vulcan, you have the initial splash screen brought up, a bit of license information in your previously used directories. Well, this is the new version of that, if you like, but it has much, much more. So for a start, it looks and feels a bit differently. This interface itself is very customizable, so you can stick your own icon in here. If I want to get a pretty picture, I can do so. I do, so I'm going to, because I like having my geology on the screen. So it's very customizable in that, although that's just a nice feature, it also means companies can have their own corporate backgrounds and sort of standardize things from that point of view. We also introduced the idea of roles, so we can actually take advantage of different roles which will allow different accesses to part of the software. Now, we haven't done a lot with that currently, but that's something we can certainly do a lot more with down the track. Up here we have what was, I guess, Vulcan. So you have the Envisage component for version 10, you have ISIS, and all the other sub-applications of Vulcan that can be run as a standalone entity. Here, of course, is your existing your Vulcan directories, your data directories. Now, that in the instance of version 1 is going to be for Vulcan, but beyond version 1, it might be your studio directories or your Eureka directories. And there's a little filter here, so if I just want to see where's my one called coal, there it is there, right? That kind of thing. So if you have a lot of these, because they do build up, very easy to sort of get access to the one you want to use. Down here are what we call tools. Now, they're things that you can use without having to use Envisage itself. So, setting up a plot file, a simple text editor, using a shell, either the integrated one or the old school T-shell, getting to your license information, that kind of thing. Down here further is my what's called the installed application. So these are my Maptek products. If you remember, I mentioned my desktop having all these things sitting on it. Well, here they all are neatly lined up and corralled in this one interface. So no longer do I go foxing around my interface trying to find things. And if I happen to have more than one instance of an application, I can see the different instances I have installed, different versions if you like, and choose one to be the default next time. In addition, we've allowed you to pick up any older versions of Vulcan that you might want to use for whatever reason, and just easily access them from here. Beyond that, we have a lot more products than you might be aware of. So if you're at all interested in those, here is the full suite, if you like, of the current product list, with their little icons, the periodic table as I like to call it. And any one of these, if you click on one, it actually takes you to our web page and some information about that product. So again, this front start page is certainly not just a one-way street. It's not just a way of getting into a product. We can provide a lot of information to you guys out there about what we're doing in terms of our products, either actively where you click on something, but also here we have a news feed. So we're going to make sure that this stays current and up to date with all the news you might be interested in, what's happening in Maptek itself. So you can see here I've talking about getting Eureka free. So everyone who has a eligible license will see this Eureka icon to use and have a play with. We've actually introduced cloud-based licensing for Eureka. So we're using that as a test bed for our licensing, which will be the way of hopefully licensing all our products in a much more simple fashion down the track. And some introduction. And this will be updated and curated, and we're not going to bombard you with rubbish, but we can certainly take this concept a lot further, and we need you guys, the users, to give us ideas as what you would like to see on this front page. Further to that, there's a little bit of inbuilt help, tips on how you use the thing, get you started. There's information about what you have installed. Also, if someone says what version of Vulcan you're running, you can give them, it's 78B4A419. The system, so it's always a pain to figure out what system information about your PC. There it is there. What license you're using in case sleep is eluding you. And a built-in nice little memory dashboard thing, so you can quickly see what sort of memory is being used by Envisage or anything else you're running for that matter.
Perfect, Pete. Thanks. Maybe just to wrap up the demo part, maybe you can hop inside of Vulcan 10 here and show us 5 or 6 of some of the cool things that are coming with Vulcan 10 specifically.
Sure. So I'll focus on more the interface side of things, not the actual functionality. Obviously, there'll be other webinars on specific bits of applications and things within Vulcan 10. So what we've done is we've gone to a lot of effort to make it as less scary or threatening, if you like, to change from Vulcan 9 or whatever it is to Vulcan 10. So we've basically, although this entire interface is totally decoupled from what you're working with on the graphics screen now, rather than being one big program, we haven't gone to town changing the interface radically. Okay, you've still got your usual menus and they drop down and you can pick the ones you'd like to use. As I mentioned before, though, we've gone to the trouble of now saying, well, actually I happen to be working in China with my Chinese clients, or I'm a Chinese user myself, and I can now use Vulcan and Envisage in Chinese, right? And that is not just the menus, it's actually, if I write layer names, if I want to put things on plots, call triangulations with characters, all the way through the Vulcan code, that's been changed as well. So it's not just the workbench itself. We've gone to a lot of effort to make that possible. I'm going to go back down here to sunny Sydney. One other one we've included is a new workflow tool. Now, I think this is one of my favorites and something people will really jump on. So under the Workbench Customize option, you might be familiar with setting up your own toolbars, setting up your history list, setting up your own hotkeys. That's all still there. You can see now we've got this nice little graphic hotkey illustrator. But I can also set up my own workflow. We're actually not calling it a workflow because we're going to develop this concept much, much further. We're just calling it a command list for the time being. So we're sort of underselling ourselves a little bit. So I can say I want to make a new one, and I can rename that. Let's call this Webin 2. Okay. So then I can say, well, which application within Vulcan do I want to actually make my workflow from? So I'm not limited to things in Envisage itself. I can use Workbench, I can use ISIS, but let's go to Envisage and say I want to make a quick thing that says, okay, we're going to create a polygon. Unfortunately, it doesn't help with your typing. It would be great if it did. I can insert a pause at any time into the process, so I can then type in a prompt so when the user uses it. When I'm ready to make a polygon, I go to the appropriate menu, much the same as you set up your own menu or toolbar, and I drag that under my workflow. So you see now I'm building it up. Okay, call it Fred 5. Now I might want to do some analysis on that. So let's go back to the analysis menu, and I'm going to find out what the actual polygon area of that thing is. So let's put that underneath there, and now make a triangulation of it. Call it Tom. So then we can jump down to obviously something like model create, and I'm using a very simple example, but we can guide users through quite complicated, and especially new people to your sites, quite complicated sort of processes. So I'm going to save this and call it, I've already said that, didn't I? Save that and make it red. Okay, so when I'm happy with that, hit OK. It says, where do you want to save this? So this can be in your local area, or you can have a shared area you want to put these things in. And that will go and update and create a new option on this command list menu up here. So you can see I've already made a few here before. I think I called that one Webinar 2. So if I go to run this, it's taken me straight to the let's create a polygon. So I'm going to call that Fred. And it says, replace it I called it the wrong thing, didn't listen to my own prompts. I make my polygon, done. So now I've gone to polygon area, and I can create, say, terrific, I want to find out the area of that, bam, and now it's taking me straight to create a triangulation. Okay, so this is obviously a very simple example. I think I was going to call that Tom, and make it red. Let's put my prompt up here, and go OK. And now it's basically I've done that command list. Now if it's something that can be run without user interaction, I can bundle that into a single step and just run it. You'll also see down here, I'm starting to put some information into this window. So if I want to grab, say, everything that's in here and actually send that to a little text editor, it's a matter of just picking our inbuilt editor or right-clicking on it. You can see now I have up here in my tabs a little inbuilt text editor with that text in it. And I can use simple, search and replace and that kind of thing in here. So I don't have to jump out into anything else. It's built into Vulcan Envisage itself. And if I had something that was more suitable to a CSV, so maybe grab it down here, something like this, I can actually send that to a built-in CSV tool. So you can see now anything that's sort of column formatted or comma formatted, separated, can be brought into a simple spreadsheet interface for you to organize your data, save as a CSV. So again, it's made it very quick and easy to just jump things in and out here. You can maybe use this to set up spec files and things like that if you wanted to. So that's another avenue we can really explore in terms of adding these little apps. You might notice I'm using the interface here to build up different applications, and it's very easy to browse between them. I can also, if I hit here and go Control Tab, I can actually toggle quickly between them. Now you can't see what I'm doing, but I'm just clicking on that area and saying I want to go to the text editor, bang, 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 and back to Envisage. Okay. These windows are also entities in their own right, so this is where we can start taking advantage of the new development framework. And I can yank that window out, put it on a totally separate screen, and it has its own icons that come with it, so I can still use this as a sort of standalone graphics window, if you like, while having anything else I might want in the background. I can plonk it back home again. If I fire up another app, say ISIS, it sits here in the same interface. You'll see now I have application toolbar up here as well as the actual window toolbar. So I can start doing some nice things like I want to put ISIS in line with my Envisage window. Right? And if I remove this and say load up some drill holes, quickly, and want to do some editing or whatever, then I can have my windows set up really nicely to do that. You might not be able to see it on the broadcast, but the icons have actually been enhanced as well. They used to be 16 by 16, they're now 64 by 64 high definition icons. How do you like them apples? Okay, so if I go here, I'm now in that particular hole. I can start editing things here if I've got geology sections or whatever. You get the idea. I can set up the interface, and this is only on the single screen. When you've got a multi-screen setup, it's much, much more powerful. In terms of the Explorer, really nifty little tools, like if I have a whole bunch of triangulations in a directory, like this, so I only want to see the ones that are, A midburn or A up, what's we got here, B coal. Okay, I want to see the B coal ones. I can come in here and say anything that is B underscore CO, grab for me, right? So very quickly I can start whittling down what I'm going to look at to load on the screen without having to go through, searching through or do it in Windows Explorer or something like that. And that works for both grids and layers and all that kind of thing as well. If I load triangulation on the screen, find some, you'll also notice, sorry, if I change anything, let's change this polygon here, that'll do. So if I change its properties to say a different color, I'm building up in the chain set, as I mentioned before, because I'm actually interacting backwards and forwards with the data. As I change things, we're picking up a bit of audit trail. So I've loaded a triangulation, I've changed it, I've created it, I've changed it. If I change the layer, that'll appear on there when I save it. And you basically start building up this entire audit trail of what you've been doing in your session. In terms of making the interface, I don't know, safer, if you like, for new users, I mentioned before that Grey Control is a totally separate plugin, so it's now sitting as a standalone entity which talks to the Envisage graphics interface. Apart from the obvious QA benefits of being able to test that and change it and whatever, deliver it without having to affect the reliability of Envisage, because we can intercept those communications, we can now introduce the concept of guiding a user through a workflow. So Grey Control is a very complicated process in some respects, but there's no point for the user coming down and going, I want to load a blast, click, 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 oh, but I haven't set up a specification and I haven't done anything yet. This interface has said, well, you're a new user, you might need to set something up first. And the first thing you need to set up is data sources. So the only actual thing I can do of any of these currently is define those data sources or convert an existing specification. So this is the kind of thing we really want to take advantage of going forward. You know, we can make things available to the users as they're relevant to you guys to use, rather than sort of blindly trying to figure out, you know, what do I go to next, what do I go to next. So it's a small thing, but I think will have big ramifications on making the software much, much easier to use. I think that's probably getting pretty much, there's lots of other things in there, Steve, but that's probably sort of some of the top hits. I think I went to more than 5, sorry about that.
No worries, Pete. And I think just a reminder, we're getting close to wrapping up the webinar. So if you have some questions on anything that you've seen so far, let's get those typed into the GoToWebinar screen there. So just to kind of close things out here, Pete, maybe give us a little bit of insight as to you know, what's coming next with Workbench. You know, now that we've kind of got it, we're getting the release out there. Really, what's next?
Okay, so we have sort of the immediate plan of releasing it with version 10, obviously. For version 2 of the Workbench, and this is one of these distinctions where we can actually enhance the Workbench around Envisage. I know that's sort of a strange thing, but we can actually deliver on that fashion if we need to. We want to, I mentioned Eureka before. That will currently, if you start Eureka from the icon in the start page, the launch page, will still run Eureka in its own interface. And if you're familiar with iSight Studio, it's quite similar. Going to hopefully this time next year, when you start Eureka, it'll be a window within the Workbench interface, much the same as I toggle between ISIS and Envisage. I can toggle between Envisage and Eureka. So bringing together our products and thinking of more, rather than individual products, let's think of them as functionalities, right? And we chose Eureka because A, we're going to make it available, so a lot of people should have it there and be able to use it once we integrate it. But also, it's developed on the same framework as many of our other products like Studio and Perfect Dig and Blast Logic and things like that. So the issues and problems we solve for Eureka should go a long way to getting our other products available too. Obviously, there'll be ongoing enhancements, and that's where we need you guys to give us ideas. Yes, we love this. No, we don't love that. You know, how we can improve the actual interface and how you interact with it, because it's so much more flexible now. I showed you quickly the command list. We want to make that a true workflow, and not just between applications of Envisage, but between different products. So you can have a workflow that starts in Studio, goes to Vulcan, goes to Perfect Dig, make a blast design in Vulcan, workflow through to Perfect Dig, send that through. Really start integrating our products. And behind the scenes, one of our longer term investigations is how can we, you know, basically everything we do with Maptek stuff is looking at XYZ locations and attributes. We want to try and really extract that to its lowest denominator and store that all in a common data source. So no matter what application, what product, if you like, is using that data, it's using the same data source, be it an Envisage layer or a Eureka, you know, point cloud or whatever it happens to be. True integration can really only happen once we get that common data source. So you no longer have to change formats. Going beyond that into the longer distance, I guess nothing less than the full integration of all our products is what the Workbench platform was really built for. And that's why we have spent so much time architecting it and putting all these capabilities into it. So people will no longer really need to think of products as products. Let's just think of what do you need to do. Let's build you something that can allow you to do it in a totally integrated one product work, you know, interface, if you like. And the actual product you're using behind the scenes becomes more and more relevant. You just need, I need to be able to do this, 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 this. It came from product A, B, C, and D. Here's a workflow to guide you through it. It's all sitting on a common data source. Now that obviously in itself is quite a challenge, but you know, we're up to that kind of thing. That's what we do. Also, we have to bring along things like licensing and purchasing. So we don't want 5 different dongles hanging off your machine and all that kind of stuff. And the pricing models have to reflect that. And there's a lot of scope to actually start building your own Maptek product, if you like. We haven't got that fully realized yet, but that's certainly something we're looking at very soon. And yes, really it's a platform, I suppose, and you know, going back to the very first question, why do we bother? Not just to make it look nice and shiny, or that's a nice benefit, but really to set Maptek up for the future and work forward with you guys to give you the results you need.
Perfect, Pete. And I think one final question for me before we get to some of the questions that our listeners might have is I know we've had a technology preview of Vulcan 10 now in the Workbench, and we've had a beta program. What's the feedback that you personally have received about it so far?
Yeah, Steve, overwhelmingly it was very positive. I think they loved the fact that it looked new and different and actually worked a bit different, so it wasn't just a overhaul for its own sake. They were just asked to test the actual interface itself, and you could almost see the split between, dare I say it, the newer generation and people like myself from older times, where the older times the feedback was like, oh, this looks really good, but they've moved things a little bit, and how am I going to transition between the two? We obviously have set that up with the familiarity of the interface and the ability to change different themes to make that transition as painless as possible for our quote-unquote more mature user base, if you like. The younger guys and girls just jumped on it. They knew all about pin toolbars and how it all worked. And they were busy dropping and dragging and building their own toolbars, and off they ran because it's all familiar to them. It's something they've grown up with all their lives, unlike myself, who's been staring at an Visage screen for so long. So it's generally very positive.
Perfect. Thanks, Peter. As I mentioned before, we have a time for just a couple questions here. So if you want to get those entered in, we'll see. We'll try and get to as many of them as we can. So first one here, Pete, is perhaps the obvious one, is when will Vulcan 10 be available?
When will it be released? Very soon. We're in the final stages of polishing up and finishing testing on both Vulcan 10 and the Workbench. As you will understand, basically getting 2 products ready for one release is a big challenge. Yeah, look, it's we haven't finalised the date totally, but very soon. It's probably the best I can give you right now.
Perfect. One more here, Pete, is licensing has been an issue a couple of times. Has there been any improvements with the licensing coming in Workbench or Vulcan 10?
In terms of Vulcan, I'm aware of some new options for licensing. I'm probably not the best person to ask specifically on licensing. I know there's dongle-less licensing. One thing I can talk about, as I mentioned briefly before, is that Eureka. We're going to actually, when you fire up Eureka, if you're eligible for it, you'll be asked to provide a user login and account name. We'll check that, and basically you can be sent a license back over the internet, and that will be the licensing process, and you just need to be working connected to the internet for that license to be available to you. So we're using the free trial of Eureka, which is there for about 1.5 years, to give us a benefit as a platform to test out some new licensing ideas in a non-sort of direct production environment, for want of a better word. So it is something that we're very aware of having to streamline, especially as our products integrate. All the licensing and such that goes with it has to integrate as well, otherwise it just becomes a bit of a mess.
Thanks, Pete. So there's a couple more, but I think we're probably out of time for today. So if you ask a question and we didn't answer it, expect a follow-up email from either probably Pete or myself here in the next day or so, and we'll be sure to get all of the questions answered. So if you have any additional questions, you think of something after the webinar is over, you can always post them in our users area on our website, or if you're not a Maptek client and don't have access to the users area, you can always email solutions@maptek.com, and somebody will be sure to get those answered for you. So On behalf of the entire Maptek team, I'd like to thank Pete for his presentation today, and you guys for